And so this talk is really a slightly expanded version of the talk I gave at the public library. And, it starts with this pretty straightforward question: is there hope for the climate? And the abstract was tantalizingly empty. And I'll start by saying yes. Okay, and that's but the whole rest of the talk is really about why is it yes? What are the reasons behind it? And hopefully in the next, 45 minutes or so, I'm trying to convince you at least my point of view and why I think there's hope for the climate. So let me start with the sort of the bad news, which is, the carbon dioxide of the last 800,000 years, as we're all familiar with, has been pretty bad. The highest known previous was about 300 parts per million. And the dashed line actually is not just showing you the expanded version, but it's actually showing you the way that the carbon dioxide concentration has increased in the last 30, 40 years or so. It's gone up from about 300 to, in the end of 2023, the average is about 420 parts per million, which is basically the highest in about a million years. And this is all coming because of primarily from our energy consumption profile, which you can see over here in the gray over here, dark gray is oil, natural gas, and coal, and then the rest of it. So that accounts for close to about 80% of all of our energy sources. So all the carbon that was sequestered under the ground is now being burnt up as fuel. Basically, that's what's going on. And this is what it looks like. It's pretty terrible. And so, to me, the only choice, and so in this energy consumption by source from 1965 onwards, again, it's fairly bad news. Oil and coal and gas were close to 95% in 1965. And if you look at 2020, there's been a slight dent from all the other sources until 2020, and basically nothing has really changed. So, and recent events, which I won't bear repeating, are making us even more negative about the climate. So why is there hope? I think, but we have a choice. The choice, I think, is nuclear energy. We really have not paid enough attention to nuclear at all, because nuclear hasn't had any carbon emissions at all. It's sustainable, it works very well, but there's a problem with nuclear, which is it's waste. So what we need to do is use a nuclear reactor that's very far away, like this. And here, all the waste and all the radioactive substances are 93 million kilometers away from us, or something like that. It's far enough away, I don't care about it. And what we'd like to do is harness the power of solar in solar cells. So that is what happened on 25th April 1954, almost exactly 80 years ago. 70 years ago. And what you see over here in the little thing are these solar cells, the solar cells, which were invented by Chapman Fuller Pearson at Bell Labs. And what they allowed you to do, they give you free energy. It's absolutely unbelievable. You take this little thing, you put it out in the sun, and for the next 20, 25 years, you get free energy. I mean, other than the initial cost, it's just free. It just comes from the sun, and there's no carbon footprint. So that sounds like a pretty good idea. And in fact, people have been converting these solar cells into modules, which are on the right over here. And then the modules get put into panels, the panels get put into arrays, and these go into a PV system, which has a bunch of other things which are not particularly relevant, but you need inverters to make it into AC, you need some charge controllers, etc. But you can do it at scale. I mean, here is a solar farm that's not that big. Here's something a bit bigger. To see it, you need to go off into a plane because it's fairly big, or even bigger, which you need to go into space to see from. This is from Sentinel-1, I believe, Sentinel-2, I believe, and you can see from year 2016 to 2022, this is the Thar Desert in India, and you can see it's gone from fairly small blobs over here to something fairly extensive. It's 22 square miles. But this is not even the biggest in the world. The biggest in the world actually is in China, in the Gonghe Talatan Solar Park in Qinghai, which is 25 square miles and still growing. Right, this is producing, I believe, something like 7 or 8 gigawatts of power, which is a lot. 1 gigawatt is 1 nuclear reactor. This is about 7 nuclear reactors worth of production in just one single site. And absolutely unimaginable. Can you imagine cleaning all these panels? So you need drones, you need UAVs, you need all sorts of the technology. And in fact, I was working with a startup company which was responsible for managing 400,000 panels in India. And we came up with optimal cleaning schedules because it's actually a fairly difficult thing to do for this. You have to actually take into account when is the next rainfall planning to come and how much is the degradation. It's a very complex. I have a student did a master's thesis on exactly this because it's a pretty difficult problem. So everybody's getting into. Do you know what this is from? Can you guess? It's yeah, Orlando. Yeah, even Disney has this. And solar panels are not incompatible with agriculture. There's something called agrivoltaics. This is actually a farm in Germany where the farmer makes money by renting this land out to have to be grazed and also keeps the grass down so the solar panels produce more energy. Right? So it works pretty well. And of course, you can grow things. This is in Colorado where they are actually growing plants. It's quite common in France now and in Italy where people are growing oranges under solar canopies because it keeps the hailstones from destroying the crops. So you don't have to make a choice between agriculture or solar. You can actually do both. And in fact, a solar plant is producing energy from the sun just like a plant does, except the plant does it at 1% efficiency and solar plant is at 22% efficiency. It's 22 times more efficient than these plants. So installed solar capacity in the world is actually growing dramatically. If you look at the x-axis, which is in years to 2000 to 2022, the y-axis is logarithmic from 1,000th of a gigawatt, just a megawatt, all the way up to a sorry, this is one megawatt, this is a tenth of a megawatt, all the way up to 1,000 gigawatts. The world reached 1 terawatt of solar production in 2022, of which basically it's China is leading the world. And there's an order of magnitude greater than India, Brazil, Spain, Mexico, Chile. Quite interestingly, the US is not anywhere to be seen in this map over here, right? But we'll come to that in a minute. But the other thing that's interesting is that it reached 2 terawatts in 2024. So it took 68 years to go from 1954 to 2022 to get 1 terawatt, but it went from 2022 to 2024 to 2 terawatts. And we'll probably get 3 terawatts probably by mid of 2026, something like that. It's because there's an exponential increase over here. So these doublings are actually happening faster and faster. And so why? Right? You're seeing these results. What is going on? And basically, it comes down to price. Here's the price history of silicon PV cells. I could only get data up to 2015. This is from Wikipedia, and it started at 50 pounds watt. 1 watt was 50 pounds. So a typical 300 watt cell would be 15,000 pounds in 1977, and now it's 25p, right? A watt in bulk, when you put it in bulk. So that's basically all of this is because of price coming down exponentially. And this slide is worth understanding. And this is like, when I give this presentation, I say this one graph is basically the future of the world. So let me walk through it fairly slowly. So on the x-axis, I'm showing the cumulative installed capacity. So, and on the y-axis is the price per watt. And, and on these dots, each dot represents a year. So this is 1980, 1990, 2000, etc. And this is like 1975 roughly. So yeah, whatever, some 75, 76. It was about $100 a watt, actually closer to $200 a watt, because very little was installed. And as you go through the 1975, as you go to 1980, it's still about $40, $45 a watt, something like that. Dropped down to $10 a watt. And then it kind of struggled at about 5, and then there's been a steep decline. But the main interesting thing is that as we increase 1 order of magnitude more in capacity, total installed capacity, you get 1 order of magnitude decline in price. And this is what's called the learning curve or Swanson's law. And what it says is the more you make, the cheaper it gets. And the cheaper it gets, the more you make. So there's this positive tipping point, positive feedback cycle. And I want to actually illustrate one more thing that is interesting, which is that there's actually also policy intervention, right? It's not just pure kind of brute capitalism, it's cheaper, so you can do it. But actually, look at this over here. We have a stalling of the price for about 4 or 5 years in the early 2000s. What happened is that in Germany, let me try and move this out of here. Okay. In Germany, they passed this law called the EEG, and down here, I can't even read it. I had the translation, but anyway, it's the
renewable energy law.
it's a renewable energy law, but I can't pronounce it. Okay, Martin. Thank you. Renewable energy, thank you very much. And also the extra tax you have to pay, the EEG Umlage. So everybody paid extra on their electricity bill, and they used that money to put in feed-in tariffs. And which means if you put a solar panel, you'll get paid for the money you feed into the grid. And they were paying quite a lot, about 40 euro cents a kilowatt hour, which is a pretty decent amount of money. So people were saying, hey, you know what? Let's go put solar panels. And farmers in Bavaria went off and converted fields into solar fields. And this actually caused the price to eventually decline again. It had stalled over here. There was really nothing happening, and it would have sputtered out. But the Germans, we owe Germany a lot because they put in 140 billion euros overall into this EEG bill. The German Greens forced this to happen in a series of laws between 2000 and 2017 that actually made this happen. But this feed-in tariff, which was the highest in the world at the time and the most sort of thought through, made it possible for this decline to happen. And then the Chinese got in. And the Chinese 12 Chinese 5-year plan in 2010 specifically targeted several policy interventions, including feed-in tariffs, support for infrastructure, support for power purchase agreements. I mean, like essentially every policy thing you could get your hands on, they put it into it. And they said, this is the future, is China should be dominating in PV production. And you can see right away what happened. Basically, this collapsed the German PV industry. In 2012, the German PV industry was gone. And the Chinese industry took over and continues to be the dominant production. And that is why, if you go back a few slides over here, you can see right here, that's China, right? So essentially, this is what's going on. China is to put it bluntly, saving the world in terms of carbon emissions because of its huge investment into policy interventions to make PV possible. So that's kind of one thing that's happening. I want to go into a little bit more detail into 3 characteristics of solar generation that's worth understanding. One is what I said already, it's free energy, it's near zero, almost zero operational expense. It's almost nearly maintenance free. You have to go off and squeegee it off from time to time. Solar panels are almost indestructible. You can walk on them, you can drive on them, you can make them into car parking lots and drive on them, you can make them into roadways. Because actually what it is, the solar active component is only 10 microns thick. It's on a big sheet of plastic, which is polycarbonate plastic. So it's basically plastic with a little bit of active element inside it. So you don't have to be finicky about it. You can literally, you just squeegee it off with a regular squeegee. So I have solar panels at home. Once in a while, I just go up with a bucket and clean it off, and that's basically it. And if it rains a lot, you don't even need to do that. So it's pretty much maintenance free. And this part is interesting. The amount of generation depends on the geography. So this shows you the photovoltaic power potential. Places like Saudi Arabia actually are lucky. Not only do they have a lot of oil, they also are very, very good for solar. Australia is very good. Chile is very good. Southwest US is very good. Of course, all of Africa, Sahara, and so on. So where we look at Germany, it's not so great, and neither is Scotland, right? So Europe actually is very badly off in terms of solar. So the fact that Germany invested so much in solar was, in some sense, not the most efficient thing to do. Okay, they're better off paying for big solar plants in South Africa or something, or Australia for that matter. But anyway, that's what they did. But that kickstarted the energy industry. So I want to now talk a little bit about wind power, which in many ways looks like solar power. So it also has the same characteristics. The wind is free and it's a low operational expense. Most of the costs are upfront. So it's not completely maintenance free because you need to go and maintain it. Typically, if it's offshore wind, it's exposed to really bad elements. You have kind of all of the salt and corrosion and so on. Similarly, it has like a fairly large lifetime. And the amount of generation depends on the geography. So over here, we see right away why the UK is a wind superpower. Right here is the UK, and the scale, I'm afraid they just move this away. You can see the scale over here. This is like the windiest portion of part of the world, and UK is pretty much over there. So that's one reason why the UK has been super good in reducing its carbon footprint, because it has a lot of wind, whereas other places are not as windy. So again, it's generation depends on the geography. Okay, so now I'm going to take these characteristics of wind and solar and talk a little bit about how that translates into commercial reality, and it'll take a minute to do it. So before I do that, let me just talk a little bit about wind generation. The same kind of hockey stick curves are out here. You can see again, just like with PV, China is leading the world. It has by far the largest amount of wind power generation. The US is actually doing very well. Surprisingly, a lot of wind generation in the US is in Texas, a very Republican state, mainly because they make money. So they don't, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, if you're making money, it's fine to do wind power. So Texas has a huge amount of wind power. And again, Germany, which got into wind power early, and then the UK. So even though the UK is per capita one of the largest wind powers, it's as such, it's not a very large country. So it doesn't have as much wind power. Likewise, Denmark is very much reliant on wind, and it's not, but it's still not that much compared to the other countries. This is the learning curve, the equivalent of Swanson's law for four technologies. So I'm showing over here concentrated solar, which is kind of, again, as a learning curve, that's not as important, I'll skip that. Offshore wind, which is declining like this, and the black line onshore, which has even more deployment and even cheaper. And then here's solar PV. I'm just showing I'm just showing the same from 2010 to 2023. So the first thing you can see, solar is actually ahead of wind in terms of total deployment. So it's more down on the x-axis. The prices have come down, the slopes are steeper, but we still have that exponential decrease in price with respect to deployment. And wind actually, especially onshore wind, you can see right here, is going down fast, quite fast, actually about the same rate as solar. And this box over here explains why Labour government wants to promote onshore wind, because if you compare onshore, which is over here, to offshore, there's way more deployment and about an order of magnitude lower cost for onshore, right? Just because you don't have to worry about going off into ships and this and that. So this is really an insight into why onshore is important. Same thing, the more you make, the cheaper it gets, and it feeds back over here. And the same kind of policy interventions, just in the case of the UK, one of the biggest things they did was called contract for difference. It sounds very complicated, but what it is that you tell a wind producer, I'm going to buy all the wind energy you produce at a particular price, let's say £1 a kilowatt hour. If the market price is higher than £1, they pay back to the government whatever they make. If market price is less, then they get a subsidy. And so they never make less than £1. They always, so that means they have a guaranteed return on the wind generation for the next, let's say, 20 years. And this is what's called a power purchase agreement in other parts. In the UK, it's called contract for difference. But there's also an obligation to buy non-fossil fuels from major consumers of energy. There's strategic planning and leasing of the sea floor, which belongs to the Crown. So the Crown leases auctions off the sea floor to industry, to wind generators. There's a carbon price floor, so you must pay a minimum carbon price starting 2011. There's money that you can borrow to put in wind farms. And there's national target that says by this year, we'll have so much decarbonization. So right now, our target is completely decarbonizing the energy sector by 2030, which means if you're putting in wind, you know what's going to happen. You're going to get that wind power is definitely going to be bought. You can get money to make it. So what aligns up, and that's why we are able to do this. So, okay, so that's so much, but is it really true? I mean, I've shown you some graphs, I've shown you some projections. Are they really winning? And to understand that, you have to understand something called the levelized cost of energy. And so I'm going to walk you through what this means in some detail. But let me just show you the sort of take-home figure, which is the effective cost per kilowatt hour. So what is the effective cost? So let's take a look at this. This is from a company called Lazard, which produces this annually. On the x-axis is what's called the levelized cost of energy. Again, think of it as the price of energy, roughly speaking, in dollars per megawatt hour. And on the y-axis are different kinds of technologies. renewables, and actually on top is renewables and the bottom is conventional. But let me just draw this line over here for 2024. And what you see right away is that the utility scale solar, which means solar farms rather than residential, is at about $29 a megawatt hour. Wind onshore is $27 a megawatt hour. These two are much cheaper than gas turbines, nuclear, or even coal or combined cycle gas. Combined cycle gas is probably the cheapest, but essentially this is the cheapest. So you are getting the cheapest if you buy wind and solar. Renewables are in fact cheaper. Now compare this to the situation 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, where we were at $10 or $15 a watt for solar, right? So what's happened is we've had this exponential decline, and that has undercut all the conventional energy sources, fossil energy sources. So let's understand how this works. So let us say, I'm going to just keep it with solar. Let's say I spend £1,000, right? Oh, that shouldn't be 31, that should be 1,000. Okay, I don't know where the 3 came from. Anyway, so I'm spending £1,000 and I get, sorry, I spend £1,000 over here, and I'm buying some certain amount of kilowatts of generation, and I buy 1,000, let's say 1,000 watts. So I'm getting 1,000 watts of solar panels for £1,000. I'm paying a pound a watt. And now I want to compute the average cost per unit energy over 20-year lifetime. So I want to know what it is, right? Because I've just put it in, and it kind of depends on how much I produce. So let's say I produce 1,000 kilowatt hours over the lifetime, over 25 years, then my cost is going to be $1 a kilowatt hour, £1 a kilowatt hour, right? Because I spent £1,000, I produce 1,000 kilowatt hours, and it's going to cost me £1 a kilowatt hour. It's very simple, just divide one by the other, right? Now, what happens if due to Swanson's law, I go to 800 pounds, but cheaper? Well, I'm still producing 1,000 kilowatt hours, so my price just went down to 0.8 pounds a kilowatt hour, right? Okay, so so that's one thing. Other thing is, now let's say this was northern Germany, produced only 1,000, and I moved my panels to Saudi Arabia, where I'm producing more and more and more. So in Southeast Europe, let's say I'm producing 2,000 kilowatt hours over the lifetime because it's sunnier, right? Then I'm only paying, it only costs me 50p a kilowatt hour, right? Because I'm producing more and more for the same investment in cost. So what this means is that the sunnier the location, the shallower the slope, right? And if I go back to this one over here, as I push the price down, I'm sliding down these lines, basically, right? So I start with the low line, depending on this, and then as my Swanson law comes in, I push further and further left, but the cost of grid energy stays the same, or in fact goes up, right? Grid energy with its fossil fuels is basically either going up or staying the same, which means that because of the push on the left with Swanson's law, I am essentially riding down the y-axis on the price. So no matter which country I'm in the world, I will slide down to below the grid energy at some point, just because Swanson's law is pushing me to the left. Basically, the Chinese manufacturers are making it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, pushing the price per kilowatt to the left, and so you slide down. And so Saudi Arabia will be the first to go below cost of conventional grid energy, and then the Southwest US, and then France and Germany, etc. So each country, even Finland, will go below this line at some point when this price gets low enough, right? Because this price keeps going to the left, essentially. And so this means that, because the conventional grid actually is going up, it's not staying the same. Renewables win everywhere, in every country. It'll happen different times that it wins. So just to give you an example of this, the largest deployment, one of the largest deployments in the world last year of solar PV was, can you guess which country it was in? I mean, there's a huge number of gigawatts of solar. Can you guess which country it was in? Okay, I'll give you a hint. It's in the Middle East.
Saudi Arabia?
It was Abu Dhabi. Now, why did Abu Dhabi deploy solar? Because, and I heard this when I went to this talk in the Judge Business School, because it was very simple. They realized that they're selling oil and they have a lot of solar potential. So all the energy they can consume themselves from their own solar, means they don't have to burn their own oil, they can, somebody else burn it and pay the money for that.
Yeah.
So solar is cheaper than oil. So it was better for them to put in solar panels and make energy from it and use it for their air conditioning than to burn their own oil. They'd rather sell it to somebody and make money, right? So that's what levelized cost of energy going below conventional means. When a country like Abu Dhabi is investing serious billions of dollars into putting up solar panels because it's a cheap thing to do. They're not green, they're greedy. But greedy in this case, actually, that's why renewable good. Greed is, in this case, greed is good. Okay, so again, to go back to this is what's going on. You're seeing right away that the conventional energy, now this is, of course, looking at worldwide values and so on. So what you'll see is that the solar PV utility has a range of values, depending on which country, right? And actually it shows you here a range 29 to 92. And I don't know which country is 29, but probably going to be in the Middle East, 92 is going to be somewhere in Northern Europe. This is how this thing stacks up over here. So there's a problem. By definition, there's no sun at night. Right? You can't really use solar at night. So, and what you can do is you can just use solar by day and not use it at night. So even if you offset, so you just imagine it's a linear combination of two things to have your total energy bill. If one price is lower than the other, you're always better off using that when you can. So I have solar panels at home. I use solar by day at home, and at night I use grid. It's still cheaper for me because the levelized cost of energy is still lower for me to do that than to buy grid throughout the day, which is what I do. And I have so anybody who has any money right now, the simple thing you could do is to go off and put solar panels on any surface you can. And this is what happened with balcony solar in Germany. Now, you know about this, Martin, more than I do. But about a year and a half ago, somebody in Germany said, what would happen if I just put up a solar panel on my balcony, and because they had lightweight solar panels, just literally clip it on with zip ties and plug it into the plug point, and what would happen? Well, what would happen is you'd start reducing your grid energy use because you're using solar. And it doesn't reduce by too much, but you can do it today. So in Germany, you can do this. You can go to Home Depot, the equivalent of Home Depot, buy this panel, put it in your solar on your balcony, plug it in, and your bills go down, right? It's about 600 euros, I believe, for this. And in the UK, we can't do that. We actually have to get an electrician to come and do this, to install it and plug it in, this electrical thing. But in Germany, you can. So they have, as the last time I heard about this, they had 700,000 of these balcony systems installed. So just literally people going off and plugging it in and saying, we're doing something for the climate. And it's producing a serious amount of electricity, because even if you plug in two panels, that's 600 watts of electricity generation during the day. And on a day like this, you're offsetting all of your afternoon solar energy consumption just from that. So this is what I mean by saying use solar by day. I have to keep moving this off. Okay, you're right. Okay, so the other problem is variability. So this is showing 30 days of solar in yellow, 30 days of wind in blue, and the daily load profile for 30 days in red. And the averages, the blue average of the other, and so on. So we want to meet the red from the green, from the blue and the yellow, essentially. But it's kind of hard to do, right? You just can't do it at any point in time. So what you really need to do is to decouple. And that's what you do with storage, right? So storage basically says, whenever you have extra electric energy, put it into your battery. And when you need to, you can remove it from battery. And it sort of looks like a RAM, okay? It sort of looks like sizing a buffer for a RAM in a switch. When you have extra packets coming in that you can't serve from your output link, put it in your buffer and the link up opens up, serve it. And it turns out that there's some work I did with some students about 15 years ago. The same kind of analytical tools used for sizing router buffers with some little changes, or not little, but some changes can be used to size storage for solar panels. So it's a kind of isomorphism between these two problems, which is quite pretty. But at any rate, storage allows you to decouple supply and demand. And this is what storage looks like usually. You have two reservoirs. When you have extra electricity, you pump up water to the top. And when you need electricity, you let it come down again. And this works wonderfully in countries that have hills. So it doesn't work in Cambridge, on the fence. And actually, most parts of southern Germany doesn't work well either. So the Austrians have the Alps. So whenever there's extra electricity in Germany, they pay Austria to take it up. And at night, they pay Austria again to bring it down. So Australia wins both ways, both going up and coming down. Same thing is true in Ontario and Quebec. So Ontario has no hills to speak of, and Quebec has mountains. So Ontario pays Quebec to take electricity away from it and to give it back to it. So Quebec has free childcare and Ontario doesn't. So I don't think it's actually true, but it's a nice story. Anyway, this is what storage looks like today, actually. It looks like these big shipping containers jam-packed with batteries. This is the plant in Escondido in California. And this is what, this is because storage also is getting cheaper. So here is the storage price trend. This is over here is dollars per kilowatt hour. So you're seeing over here for basically you're paying, for the actual cells, and you package them together for $780 a kilowatt hour. But it was about 15 years ago or 12 years ago. But by now it's come down to about 140, which is pretty, generally speaking, relatively low. At about 120 to 130, something like that. Battery cars are cheaper than electric cars, than gasoline cars, and we're very close to the tipping point. And so what's happening is that this is what cars look like today. These little lunchbox sized things are actually are batteries. And this thing is called the skateboard. So the skateboard is sort of a chassis that's manufactured. And then on top of that, they bolt on whatever they want to bolt on. So all the different electric cars really are the same thing. It's just a skateboard with this thing underneath. And then, they add whatever stuff on top to make it look different. And because of, so what's happening is that the storage technology is also in the same kind of learning curve. I'll show you in a minute, but we're seeing this amazing deployment of electric vehicles. So in 2017, the total number of electric vehicles sold worldwide was hardly anything, a few tens of thousands, but in 2024, it hit 10 million, right? Again, this blue thing is China, right? This is actually 2025, already, so another statistic is that more cars were sold each day in 2025 than in the entire year in 2017. Okay, and you can actually see this when you go out in the streets. I moved to Cambridge in 2019, and every time I saw an electric car, because UK had this brilliant idea of putting a little green bar on your license plate saying it's an electric car, I would say, hey, it's an electric car. My wife was really fed up with it. Every time pointed it out, car, because it was such a novelty. Now, if I kept doing that, she would really divorce me or something. There's so many of them. Right? I mean, I've been I routinely in a situation. I'm driving an electric car, and all the cars around me are electric as well. I mean, okay, this is Cambridge, but other places are going there as well. And once we get the price of battery electric vehicles cheaper than gasoline, which is going to happen very, very soon, especially if the EU reduces its tariffs on Chinese EVs, because Chinese EVs are not only the cheapest, but also at the moment the best, right? We will actually get to the point where there's no point in buying a gasoline car because you will not be able to get mechanics to repair it, right? That's going to be the problem. If you're going to buy a gasoline car in 2030, there's a lifetime of 10 years. In 2040, where you going to get the gasoline from? Who's going to fix the car for you? Right, and that's going to be the problem going forward. And I was on a trip last week. We're driving through on the N5, and I went to N5 forecourt near Exeter, and there were about 80 electric chargers, and each of them was charging at about 300 kilowatts, which is very fast charging. 80 of them, right? There's way back in the corner is a small gasoline station. But about half of it is full. I mean, electric cars are really coming on, and the M series roadways in the UK, every one of them has lots and lots of chargers. So when I started driving electric cars here about 5 years ago, I had to plan the trip, and I'm going to get off there and charge here and this and that. So I don't even think about it. Just go. And that's again, it's happening in our lifetime. Why? Again, same kind of positive feedback loop, and again, policy support. And these are the things that the Chinese government has done for supporting EVs. So their regulatory mandates on new energy vehicle quotas and the sales targets of battery vehicles, the financial incentives. If you buy electric cars, they give you a subsidy, a tax benefits, infrastructure support, there's safety and standards, public procurement of fleets, which is a big thing. The government buys a lot of stuff, and funding for R&D and innovation. So this has really made the best known Chinese brand BYD winner not just in the cost, but also the technology is absolutely incredible. The latest vehicle from BYD has a charging rate of 1 megawatt, 1,000 watts, which means you can charge from 0 to about a 350-mile range in 5 minutes, right? But only in China, do they, I can't even sell it outside. And, they have enough of a market, they're not even planning to sell it outside. But if anybody catches up with them, that means that your gasoline car is like, why would you want one, right? Somebody said, nobody's running a gasoline pipeline to your house. Okay, so this is the learning rate for lithium-ion batteries. I couldn't find one beyond 2014, but similar kind of learning rate is happening here as well. So the more you ship, the cheaper it gets, etc. That kind of law is coming in here as well. And here is an example from about 100 years ago. So this is Easter morning in 1900. And on the left, if you look very carefully amongst all the horses, there's one car. Right, and this is 1913, the same road, same location. If you look very carefully, you'll see one horse. Right? So this is what's happened about 100 years or 125 years ago. And this is happening today. In what 10 years from now, if you were to look around you, it would be hard for you to spot a gasoline car. It'll be these leftover relics, like a retro. I have a gasoline car, and a fountain pen. So in other stuff that's going on is building electric lighting. So we don't pay much attention to this, but I used to do some work on this area. So about building lighting using incandescent bulbs used to account for 30% of building electricity use, costs about 180 billion pounds a year globally. But if you go from incandescent to compact fluorescent to LED, you get a 10-to-1 reduction, and same kind of thing is seen over here. We're going from about cost per kilolumen, this is the light production, has gone from 12 to about $12 to about less than $1. And then the volume of shipments has gone up. So essentially we are getting in 2019 already about 50% of lights sold with LED, and very soon it'll be 100%, right? And so there's a huge amount of reduction in electricity light usage. So when I was growing up and when my kids are growing up, I would say, turn off the lights. You don't need to do that, because if you leave these lights on all day, all year long, it's still only going to cost you almost nothing. Because it's just something, obviously you shouldn't do it, but even if you're there, it's not such a big deal. So to sum up, solar storage and wind, LEDs are all declining exponentially in price. They're all we don't know what the exponential is. Each one is a slightly different exponential, all coming back. But something is missing. There's something more that is actually relevant. But all of these things I'm talking to you about have nothing to do with computer science. So why am I even talking about that, right? Sensing and control is very important. I'll give you an example of this sort of intuitively. In the electrical grid, we must match generation and load all the time. If the generation goes down, the load must go down. If the load goes up, generation must go up. You have to match these all the time. In the conventional grid, the load is stochastic. So if I know the load at a particular point in time, I cannot really predict very well what the future trajectory of the load is going to be. But the generation, I have a norm. I can say, turn it up, turn it down. I have complete control because I have what 250-ish fossil fuel plants per country. And in any country, it's relatively straightforward to just turn it up and down. People have been doing that for 100 years. So this is what happens with renewables heavy grid. You have generation that's stochastic, load is stochastic, and say, oops. Now, how do I control this, right? And in fact, when the grid outage happened on Monday, this was the first thing that people said, oh, it's because Spain has a lot of renewables, this is why it happened. We don't know yet why it happened. It's possible that because of this, but this is what you really need. You need a controllable storage in the middle. And this is not that easy to do because, first of all, you have not got 250 generation plants, you have 250 million generation plants. Each solar panel is a generation. Right, so you got to know exactly what's being produced everywhere, and you need to know what the load is, and you need to control this through a set of distributed batteries. And so it means you need to forecast, you need to monitor, and you need to control storage on the generation side, grid storage on the load side, and manage all of that. And that becomes a very difficult, very challenging computation problem. And for that, you need basically Internet of Things. Right? You need a way to do pervasive communication, sensing, computation, and control. And so you need, this is what eye can be. I'm showing you that sensors are very small, Remember, it's a public process. They're going to show you can make sensors very small. This is an actual sensor that's 2 millimeter, 1 millimeter. In fact, what we use for measuring the electrical grid is something called micro power management units, micro PMUs. They're about the size of a lunchbox. But they used to cost about $40,000. Now they cost about $100. The same thing. It's all IoTs. And this is pure eye candy, pervasive communication, pervasive control. Okay, but it's getting cheaper, right? IoT is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. We're able to embed IoT in all sorts of things. For example, this projector has Internet of Things stuff inside it. That's why I won't talk to my laptop. So making everything very complicated. But anyway, the point is that we are able to build these sensing and control devices for the grid, and that's what's called the smart grid. And that's what we desperately need, because otherwise we really can't manage supply and demand in a renewables heavy grid. That's super important. So that's where there's a whole area of research called energy informatics, which deals essentially with this. And so, that's an area that I've been working in for some years. We've been helping to keep that area started and going last 15 years. So this is something I'm very happy to be part of. So what is the world going to look like if all of these things come to pass? This particular, selection from Shakespeare comes to my mind. What is it? What is this brave new world that has such people in it? This is the European Commission's view of the brave new world, and so it has renewable generation. So we have over here wind turbines, we have tidal generation, we have wind, offshore wind, onshore wind, solar panels. You have biomass, you have this communication control, you have satellite based, fiber optic connection, basically all over the place, you have communication control, otherwise it doesn't work, right? In some sense, computer science, computer communication technologies are embedded into the lifeline of what the future is going to be. You can't just stop and say, well, I don't want to be part of it. Without the computer science, you don't have a grid. Without a grid, you don't have modern life. Basically, you go back to living in, with oil lamps, right? What Spain was subjected to. So, in some sense, it puts us and sort of computing and computation woven into the very fabric of modern society in a way that was not the case 50 years ago, even 20 years ago. We need storage management to decouple supply and demand. So there's little bits of storage all over the place. And this demand side management basically says, why don't you reduce your usage now? And this is what Octopus does here today. So they will say, if you sign up to our plan, if you reduce energy, we'll give you money. Right? We'll pay you money to stop your using your grid at this point in time. And people are doing it. It actually makes a difference, because if you get a pound off here and there twice, 4 or 5 times a month, that's saving you maybe 20% of your bill. So people are doing this. And this is an example, it's a bit hard to parse. So let me just quickly walk through this. This is from the energy dashboard for the UK. What I'm showing over here is from 2009 to 2025, the share of different kinds of sources on the electricity grid. So gas is this blue thing over here. You can see gas is going down. Green is wind. You can see what happened in 2009. There was almost no wind, and this is showing you wind is now pretty much the dominant source of electricity supply for the UK. And coal, this is orange thing. There's coal. Coal was the big generator in 2009. Within sort of living memory, coal has essentially disappeared. You can almost not see it anymore, etc. So, nuclear has gone slightly old because some reactors have been turned off, so it's been a slight decline, etc. But this particular, if I looked at this mix on the right for 2025, if we were to show it to somebody in 2010, they would say this is impossible, right? And I remember in 2010 when the German EEG law was passed, and they had the target of 30% decarbonization by 2030. Everybody said that these guys are crazy, it's not going to happen. Well, they hit the 2030 goal in 2025 already, right? So this is what's happening. Right? So one reason for this is because there's a lot of money to be made in doing this. So I'm going to have to just move this again over here. There's going to be about $30 trillion in economic activity displaced over 20 years, very approximately, because of this energy transition, which means if you can get in on the action, you're going to make a lot of money, right? So where is this money coming from? let's start with, what happened to my mouse here? Oops. Okay, let's look at the fuel cost of transportation. You're spending about $3.5 trillion a year. The world is spending $3.5 trillion a year on transportation. All included, but passenger cars, which are down here, and other vehicles that are accounting for for a fair amount over here. I mean, just ignore the rest of it. But this is the $3.5 trillion a year. If you have 30% electric vehicles, just 30% rather than the 100% we see, that's still about $1 trillion a year of non-gasoline, right? Which means $1 trillion a year less that the fossil fuel gas company is going to, fossil fuel oil company is going to make if there are EVs. Which is why every time an EV catches fire, it's world news. Because the fossil companies have every incentive to make sure to think that electric vehicles are unsafe and should not be bought, right? Every time a bicycle battery catches fire, it's like covered in the news extensively because there's a huge incentive for the oil majors to make the energy transition look negative and for people not to support it. But because $1 trillion a year, now the electricity companies annually they make about $1 trillion a year in revenue. And you can't actually read it, but the biggest electricity company in the world is E.ON. They make about $140 billion a year in revenue. And maybe they're going to have 50% renewables. I'm just going to do $500 billion a year, just roughly. Okay, and then they need to spend IoT to get everything to work. So let's say about $1 trillion, $0.1 trillion a year. And LEDs, okay, they're going to reduce that as well. It's mostly all going away. It's $0.2 trillion a year. And you add it all up, it's $1.85 trillion a year of economic change. And over 20 years, it's 37 trillion. It's more than what I said. Okay, I'm lying. Actually, what is actually happening is I'm being optimistic. I'm choosing the right end of this curve and multiplying by 20. But still, even if you take a median point over here, which is more interesting, it's still in the many trillions of dollars. Much more than my salary, I can assure you that. So this is basically a lot of economic activity, primarily coming from the electrification of the grid, which is what is causing all this. So this is reflected in the news. And if you look at 2024, this is global installed capacity. It's just going up like a rocket, right? This is a huge amount of solar and wind and hydropower that you see over here. And it just continues to rise exponentially up. Renewable resources produced 32% of the world's electricity last year. I mean, that's okay. So, and that's just shy of coal's share of 35%. And that was in 2024. 2025 probably going to overtake coal. Again, if you read Václav Smil's book on energy, he's one of the world's leading theorists or academics studying energy. I read his book in 2015. He said this is going to take 30 to 40 years. You can forget about renewables making any dent in the world's electricity for the next 30 years. Let's be realistic. And if you read Tony Blair's Institute's news reports from yesterday saying don't do this, again, it's all this negativity. And I suspect a lot of it is coming from people whose lifeline is being disrupted by this $30 trillion in change, or $37 billion in change. Here's some news articles from a couple of weeks ago. Strong 2025 wind projects. This is basically China is going to put in a lot of wind, right? 585 gigawatts of capacity additions, 90% of total power expansion in 2024. Abu Dhabi, right? The IRENA actually is based in Abu Dhabi. The National Renewable Energy is based in Abu Dhabi. And the corner of solar and battery plants are expected to be built in the US in 2025, right? With renewables producing more or less even coal in the US, right? Despite Trump wanting to bring coal back again, but it's gone away. He doesn't mention coal anymore, right? He's got other things to take over, but not coal, right? So 93% of the extra energy demand will be met by renewables in the US. And 50% of UK electricity came from renewables in 2024. Right? These are not numbers that I'm making it up. These are actually happening. You're in the middle of a transition. You probably don't even know it. And the money is coming in, $2.1 trillion in 2024. Right? When I first told you about trillions of dollars, you may be laughing, what is this guy talking about? About trillions. This is the press release, global. This is this is Bloomberg New Energy Finance. It's Bloomberg. It's not me. $2.1 trillion in 2024. So these things are actually happening. So a pond fills with water lilies, okay, so this is a little question for you. The pond fills, when is the pond half full?
The day before.
The day before, 29th day. So on the first day to the 15th day, you're seeing that teeny tiny little, water lily in the corner saying, why are you telling me about it? Nothing is, it's nothing happening. On the 15th day, it's still a tiny thing. On the 28th day, it's only a quarter full. On the 27th day, it's 10%, what, 12.5%, right? On the 26th day. And then, but the 29th day, it's half full, and 30 days, it's full. So you say, hey, where did that come from? Well, it was growing and doubling all the time. Our brain is not used to exponentials. You have to think kind of differently, when you do this kind of thing. And what I'm showing you is exponentials in deployment, exponentials in price coming down. And so it's very, very difficult for us to intuitively grasp it. And that's basically why I think that there is hope for the planet. Yes, everybody wins. Nature wins, people win, the economy wins when you do this. And yeah, that's why. So it started up by saying, yes, there is hope, and this is why there is hope. Because it's right, it's not just the right thing to do, it's the cheap thing to do. Okay, I'll stop with that. Happy to take any questions.
I've got one,
Yes,
and that is this going to be recorded
yes,
and available?
yes.
So we can go and
It's
listen to it.
being recorded right now, and I will put it on, we'll put it on YouTube, yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
so,
I had a second question.
yes, please.
Which is something for you to feel deeply unhappy about, and that is that I'm not actually driving a gasoline car. I drive a diesel car,
Okay,
and it's from 2005, and it's got extremely low annual expenditure.
yes,
And this is because of computer science, because I had a former PhD student who was Chinese, his name was Chris Chang, the guy, and what he introduced cars to via a business in Beijing, he was responsible for doing, but there's a checking company on the south coast, which validates the statistics as you carry out these things, and he was responsible for doing that. And his bosses in China told him that they didn't much like some of his figures, and would he please fake them? And at that point, he left the company and set up his own business.
okay,
Now, what the company did to me was to introduce the gadget into my car as a test case. And what the gadget does, and it's still there and it still does this very thing, is that it has, quite a complex piece of technology available under the bonnet, and it takes the fuel as it passes from the fuel tank to the ignition chamber, and it irradiates it with ultraviolet.
okay,
And the result is that it removes all the particulates. It hugely improves. And I now, I drive through the country roads, House and Suffolk. I'm doing 70 miles per gallon
okay.
in a diesel car. In central Cambridge, I'm afraid it's not as good as that. In the rush hour, I'm only getting about 40 miles per gallon out of it.
Okay, that is.
But, these things, technology
Yeah.
can really help.
Can make it, and look, the thing is, if you have an old car and, there's no point in buying a new car, unless it's about to die because of the embodied carbon. So if you buy a new electric car, it's gonna take you about 3 to 4 years of driving before you've recouped the embodied energy. So it's always better to keep your existing technology, drive it minimally, whatever.
That's why I'm still driving.
Yeah, no, absolutely, makes sense, yeah.
It's only done 180,000.
Right, okay, still like, yeah.
And CO2 emissions have been increasing year on year.
Yes.
Apart from COVID.
Yes.
So obviously the steady exponential improvements you've been showing
Yes.
are still far too small to actually kick in.
Yes.
Are you going to actually predict a tipping point?
Yes.
When
Yes.
is the tipping point?
Well, so you're absolutely right. If you remember, I started by showing that at 2020 that the curves are still fairly low. And if I can go back to that, it's about 100 slides behind me. But the peak CO2 emissions are forecast to be 2026. But we're not sure yet anymore because we don't know what's happening with the US anymore. But if it weren't for that, so this 2022 it's been actually declining pretty rapidly in 2022 to 2020 to 2025. So as I mentioned last year, what the UK at least 50% was renewables, and worldwide is about 30%.
Okay, but this graph,
Yes.
this graph is fully relative.
Yes.
But there's been an expansion by a factor of 3
Yes, yes,
over
yes.
the same time.
Yes, so the other thing that's going on is obviously the primary demand for energy is going up, right? And electricity is not the only thing that energy is used for. I mean, energy is for everything, it's transportation, right? Plus electricity, plus cement, oil, all these sort of hard to decarbonize sectors and so on. So even if you get electricity to 100% non-carbon, you will still have a lot of demand from other things. Even if you completely decarbonize transportation, electricity generation, you're still going to have demand for other things, right? So I think you're absolutely right. So what we need to do is to use the same kind of, I guess, technological advances that have been used for the transportation and electricity sectors and apply them to other sectors as well. And there is some hope there. I mean, there are cheaper ways, or I should say, more carbon efficient ways of making cement than they used to be, right? And same kind of thing is true for steel making with electric arc furnaces. So these, this is not a done deal, right? I'm just saying there is hope. I'm not saying it's solved, right? So we do need to do a lot more work, but at least it's not like, we have nothing under our belt. We have something that we can point to. But you're right, of course, yeah.
Your argument is sort of exponential will beat everything, right? And I think that's true if it continues.
Yeah.
And we don't really know whether it's going to continue. And if demand also doesn't increase exponentially.
Exactly.
Then you're stuck.
Then you're stuck. So this is why I've also been careful to say that in addition to these things, we also need policy intervention, right? We cannot achieve, like if you look at this exponential graph over here, this is solar thing. Why do we have these two bumps? This was not because, it's not Swanson's law, it was stalling, right? In 2005 it was stalling.
And it looks a little worrying right now.
It looks a little worrying right now. I've been keeping an eye on it, so far so good. But the thing is that the policy interventions to aid these kinds of changes are actually important. And, we do have to take that into account. Sorry, there's one question online, HH555. Is that Harriet? Is that you?
Yes, thank you. Really great discussion, and I'm glad you're bringing hope as well as facts into it, Keshav. Thank you. I mean, one of the problems that we're not talking about here, because it's not the subject, is the issue of the interest rates, and that we're now in a higher and more uncertain interest rate, which makes upfront cost of deployment more problematic. And the other thing is that the history of how renewables were financed has meant that there's a lot of leverage in the system. And so you've got a double problem there, both for those that are investing and those that are buying them, of living in a different interest rate environment, while the fossil fuel sector is actually relatively lower leveraged and doesn't need the same amount of upfront capex. So we're not talking about that, but it's important when we think about levelized cost of energy calculations, and also in terms of needs to shift to recognize a very different interest rate environment that we're likely to have for the next decade or so. And so that's just a one side comment. Keshav, can I just ask you about AI? Because, in Tony Blair's paper and in other work that I see, there's a very big expectation that AI is going to really help manage this, the suppressed demand for energy globally. That there are a lot of people whose needs aren't met yet with energy at all, let alone electrification, and also how to deal with our systems transition to a more renewable grid. I just wonder if we're communicating out of Cambridge effectively about what AI can do and what we don't yet know that it can do effectively, and how we can do that in a positive but realistic way. So that's just a big ask about AI.
Maybe they lost power in Cambridge, like Spain and Portugal.
Right, okay, so that's sort of where I would go. I'm afraid we need to stop because there is a DOS forum that I need to attend. So any other last question in the room I can answer?
I was going to make a comment about AI besides obviously is adding to the energy
Yes,
issue hugely. I mean, when we look at what additional energy we're using, we're looking to AI for solutions, but that's just certainly not a problem with the
Indeed.
There's a real problem with AI, I think, and that's validating the case studies that we use, because we don't have a formal model that actually fit the real world.
I think there are many such issues, but I'm going to have to stop here because we are running out of time. But thank you very much for coming, and yeah, we'll put this online.